Good morning. Welcome to Unity of Springfield, Adult Education, World Religions, and History of New Thought. My name's John Brocker, and I'm joining you here from beautiful Warsaw, Missouri. As I'm sitting here in trying to stay away from most people for my health and everybody else's. Today we're going to be talking about conscious aging from a book by Ram Dass called Still Here. And this book was started to be written before he had his stroke, and then was finished afterwards. We're going to start with a centering prayer. So get comfortable. Take a nice, deep, cleansing breath. And one more. Breathing in the spirit of life and letting go as you exhale. Who do you say you are? And where does that come from? Imagine yourself being old. And either way, is that something that I can embrace? What does my mind say about my competence, ability as a caregiver, financial supporter, answer person, active protector, change agent, or any other way that we would like to identify ourselves? And what would it be like to let go of those rules? Instead, moving slowly, being a listener, asking for help, observing others getting stuff done, feeling pain, feeling lost. Slowly experiencing realizations with a compassionate heart of wisdom. So Ram Dass, who I remember calling Baba Ram Dass back in the 70s. He was born Richard Alpert, April 6, 1931 in Boston, Massachusetts. And he died December 22nd, 2019 on Maui, Hawaii. He was son of non-practicing Jewish parents, had his bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in psychology. He did his dissertation at Stanford on achievement anxiety. In 1958, he took a position at Harvard, specialized in motivation and personality development. In 1961, he joined Timothy Leary in the Harvard Psilocybin Project, and they experimented with hallucinogenics, which led to his being dismissed from Harvard in 1963. Following he and Timothy Leary leaving Harvard, their organization kind of morphed into what they call the Castilia Foundation. And there they continued to do some experimentation with hallucinogens and held retreats for people to experience the psychedelic without drugs through meditation, yoga, and group therapy sessions. And he was always frustrated because he couldn't keep that sense, that God sense feeling after a high or after a meditation or group therapy session was over. That it would always drift away. And that's something that you see in all of Ram Dass's writings throughout the years. So in 1967, Alpert went to India, where he was introduced to Neem Karoli Baba, who became his guru at an ashram in India. And he stayed there for a couple of years and was given the name Ram Dass by Karoli, and which means servant of God. And Ram Dass referred to him as Maharaji, which was as a master teacher. And eventually he decided to come back to the United States. He was kind of actually pushed away from the ashram, saying that his time there was done, although he did return quite a few times through his life. And he came back to the United States, where he founded organizations, foundations for teachings about spiritual growth, community service, food banks and such, and also healthcare organizations, helping people with the blind, both in the United States as well as internationally. And all of his writings, all of his books, proceeds from all of his books and all of his lectures went into these organizations. In the 1970s, he taught workshops on conscious aging and dying, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross happened to be one of his students. Over his career, he wrote 17 books, and he was the subject of 7 films. And as I said, all of the proceeds went to these service organizations that he had developed. So a part of this whole idea of conscious aging is that maybe our sense of aging isn't all that conscious. And somehow we kind of get hoodwinked into an idea of what it's supposed to be like and what we're supposed to be. Ram Dass tells a story about that he heard from his father called Zumbach's Coat. So there's this man who's living in this small town, and it's known in this town that if you're going to make anything of yourself, that you must have a suit made by Zumbach, the tailor. So he really wants to be successful in business, so he goes ahead and he goes to Zumbach and he gets measured and for a suit. So Zumbach does this, and then he gets the suit, it gets cut out, and he tries it on for the first time, and he realizes it's about a couple inches too long on one of the arms. So he comes back to Zumbach and he says, "Oh, Zumbach," says, "this is the right arm is 2 inches too long at least." And Zumbach says, no, there's nothing wrong with the suit. He's very indignant about it. There's nothing wrong with the suit. He says, "Here, just stand this way a little bit. Move your arm over there. There you go. Now it's the same." And then the man realize it's bunching in the back because of the way he's standing. He says, my wife hates a suit that bunches in the back. He says, "You've got to fix that." So Zumbach says, "Well, here, move your head forward. Here we go. Come on. It's not the suit. There's nothing wrong with the suit. Just come on, move over. There you go. It's perfect. Just perfect." So he pays some good money to Zumbach and he leaves. He's waiting for a bus and he's standing there, and this man comes up to him and he says, "I see you have a new suit made by Zumbach." And the man goes, "Well, how did you know?" He says, "Well, only Zumbach could make a suit so perfect on somebody who's as crippled as you are." And just going to show how, maybe we're urged, maybe we don't always want to go along with the way that culture and the way that we were brought up says that we should be, but sometimes we get in these contorted positions that makes going through our life not as easy as it otherwise could be. We're faced with a lot of ideas from Wall Street and Main Street and marketing that tells us about the way we should be. Well, we shouldn't have wrinkles or age spots or baldness. There's all these cures for baldness. There's ageless male. You can get surgery, get nipped, tucked, enhanced. There's Botox injections. Get rid of those wrinkles. It's like there's something wrong with us if we're just naturally aging. There's a Chinese story that also is indicative, because it's not just Wall Street and marketing and our own self-talk which gets us, but it's also sometimes what other people say to us. And this sense of, are we still meaningful? So there's this old man who's too weak to work anymore. He just sits out on the porch, watches his son work the farm that he used to work. And he just sits there because he doesn't have the energy, and he knows that if he goes out there and tries to work on the machinery and work, he's going to get hurt. So he's just sitting there. And his son is starting to get a little bit frustrated by it and really wondering, like, what is the point? What good is he now that he's so old? He's just taking up food and money and energy. And I've got a family and I'm trying to raise. So he builds this large wooden box, puts it on a wheelbarrow, and he wheels the wheelbarrow over to his father. And he says, Dad, get in. So he gets in the box and he wheels him over to a cliff. And then he hears this knock on the box. And he says, What, Dad? And he opens the box. And he says, Well, you might as well just let me out and save the box and push me off the cliff without the box, because your children are going to need this box someday. And it's just something that's going to occur. Other things that have been happening and that are in our culture. I don't know if you ever remember the movie Wild in the Streets, where people, they lowered the age at which you had to be president and to be legislators, and lowered the voting age, and all of a sudden young people were running the country, and they were fencing up older folks and having them take drugs to keep them under control. And it was just kind of one of those. It was a satire, a comedy satire, but the point was, like, hey, maybe we don't need you older people anymore. And then just recently in the news, just since this coronavirus thing's been going on, I've heard politicians talk about, and talking heads on news talking about, us older folks, maybe we should, just go out and work and get out in the work world. And so what if we get the virus? And so what if we die? We're doing it for the economy. It's good for the economy and for the United States economy. And it's a good thing to go ahead and die for our country through getting ill from a preventable illness. It kind of just makes you wonder, like, okay, what is this? Is this really an ageism thing that is also coming through? And although those are kind of extremes, we do deal with the sense that we're not where we want to be sometimes, or that I don't want to be where they're at if we're younger. And even I know recently, as my folks got into their 90s and then passed and into transition, that there are certain choices that they made that I remember saying, I'm not sure I want to do that. Okay. And so it started this whole thing to reflect and say, like, okay, so what do I want? Okay. And how do I get there? And what is it that I want? And what's okay? Because I kind of wanted them to get up walking and not sit around. And I'm starting to reconsider some of those things that I have said. So some of the things I think that we need to really consider, and that Ram Dass brings up, is the possibility or an understanding that the soul continues after death. So what that does, the context is that it somewhat reduces how important how we're functioning in the physical body always is. And a transition more to a spiritual focus which also happens to be one of the things that occurs a little bit with aging, is that we do tend to, and at least in the Eastern countries, India, China, it's an expected role of folks as they're aging to focus more on a spiritual, less on day to day, get the groceries paid for, rent paid for, and have more of a role as a spiritual searcher. So we can ask ourselves a couple of questions. Do we believe ourselves to be bodies with a brain-centered mind and nothing more? And second of all, can there ever be enough? So when we're trying to be successful in life and business and families and raising our children and seeing that our children get everything that we thought we should have had, is it ever enough? So this is a little model that we look at. And this first one here, where the ego is on the outside, and the soul is on the next level in, and then deep down is Atman. So the ego, that's how we see the world. And the soul, we start to touch the soul when we're searching within. And then Atman is just the quiet whisper that sometimes that we experience. And often this is the way we look at things. And I often have. And I still often find myself looking at the world in this way and seeing myself in this way. And I would posit that maybe we ought to look at more like Atman's, the universe, unending, everywhere, is on the outside. And then look down deeper is the soul that's searching through Atman, through God, through that everything that exists through the universe. And that the ego is just the smaller part of who we are, who directs us while we're here on this plane and informs the soul of what's going on this physical plane, but allowing the soul to still have being informed by Atman, by God, by the universe, so that we're flipping the focus, so that when we're looking out, we're not looking out at the physical world, we're looking out at the spiritual world. And when we're looking in, then we're looking in towards a smaller sense of who we are. So we can also look at the self-talk. The ego is that self-talk within, which really is within. And the soul is ourselves in this learning process. And the ego is that part of us that experiences aging and death and fear, which is where we go next. So each time we pay attention to the mind and become more aware we enable the soul to step in and keep us from getting caught in the ego's habits. So these ego's habits are these habits that we're taught from culture. And in respect to aging, we have usual suspects or fears that we're going to talk about a little bit. So there's senility is really a big one. That we're very afraid of, and we can spend a lot of energy worrying about. And spend a lot of time making sure that we're doing crossword puzzles or Sudoku or learning languages to try to keep our mind fresh and alive. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong with taking care of our vessel, of our body, of our mind, of our brain, as we do spend this time in this. And yet, it's inevitable, not that we'll become senile, but it's inevitable that some things are going to slip at some points in time. So we can also embrace it. I know in my visits with my parents, particularly my mother, as she was had some memory issues that were going on, allowed for communication in a different way. Sometimes of just sitting with her. Sometimes not correcting where she was going with things. And allowing her to create a reality or a world that was okay. Loneliness is another usual suspect. It's often noted as one of the problems with aging and things that we need to try and help people who are aging and alone. And yet, that's another thing that's an inside job. Because being alone and being lonely are two different things. And being connected is something that we can choose to do regardless of how, now that we're doing this social distancing behavior, we're having to come up with creative ways to be connected. And being connected is the opposite of being lonely. So we can be connected spiritually, we can be connected by praying for another person or just thinking deeply about another person, either who is still alive or who has transitioned already. And then we're not lonely because we're connected. But we're not doing the same thing that we were doing before. Well, I'm not going to the ballpark with my son anymore. We're not playing catch. We're not going to the park. He's not taking me for drives. it's, as things change, they do change. And we don't always need to resist those changes. Sometimes we just need to kind of deepen down into what's the alternative for our fear, and really listen to the fear and find out, is the fear really founded, or do we have options on how to handle that and respond to those fears? Embarrassment is another one. Sometimes we lose control of bodily functions. Sometimes we get lost. Sometimes we forget what we're saying in mid-sentence. Many opportunities for embarrassment. And again, there's many ways that we can handle this. Do we choose to go with the flow, learn to laugh at ourselves because we are changing, we are evolving, and that's an okay thing, and it be an acceptance, being that radical acceptance part of it, rather than fighting it off? Because really, when you think about it, we were kind of embarrassing when we were younger too. We did things that were pretty embarrassing. And it's not really just part of the aging process only. Powerlessness. And this is a sense, really, of power differentials that we experience. And it's kind of related also with loss of roles and a grief process that goes along with that. So that, what is our meaning? Is there a change in finances when we're no longer gainfully employed and we're trying to find some kind of passive income, or trying to find some kind of ongoing income, or we're just on what we call a fixed income? Where do we go from there? And we don't have the money to travel and go visit everybody we would want to. We can't take as many vacations. We don't have the energy. We can't tell other people what to do anymore. And sometimes we find these young whippersnappers telling us what to do all the time. So what's that about? This loss of role, change of role. It's something to be grappled with. And again, power comes with responsibility and stress and strain. When we let go of that power, there's a release. We can relax. We have other things that we can attend to. Maybe beauty. Become more of an aesthetic. Less controlling. Let go of the controls. Let go of all the responsibility. And of course, with these kinds of loss and grief, we can often experience depression, which is often our internal dialogue, our ego, in desperation, not wanting to let go. And the suffering that occurs trying to hold on to something that's slipping away when it is slipping away. So, facing fears and cultivating a sense of warrior and fearlessness and goddess fearlessness is important. And hopefully we do it sooner rather than later, because it's important to cultivate this, facing these fears, because these fears are inevitable to occur. It just depends, how do we handle them? The ego is what experiences aging and death. It doesn't continue, but it's nearly impossible for the ego to imagine its own demise. When the ego thinks it's dying, it mistakes itself for the whole, the body, soul, and awareness. And often people who are beginning to go through the long process of ripening into God run around to different doctors and maybe even shrinks, because they develop an even more intense dread of death. So, here's a poem that Ram Dass's father sent him. The gray in your hair doesn't make you old, nor the crow's feet under your eyes, I'm told. But when your mind makes a contract your body can't fill, you're over the hill, friend, you're over the hill. So it's kind of goes back to like the 4 agreements. If you've made an agreement with yourself that's untenable, then we're just setting ourselves up for suffering. So it does pay to consider re-examining these agreements that we make with ourselves. Body image. How to use low energy. Again, this is something that, starts to happen over time. We don't have as much energy. I used to be really hyper. Adding rest and laying around to your list of things to do is a way of doing that. And being really okay with starting to decide napping is okay. Starting to decide that breaking up a job that I used to do all at once into 4 parts. Working with pain is another area. Becoming friends with pain. Becoming aware that pain is something that is a way that our body communicates with us. And it's part of it